Hi, this is Chrisferb, and I'm going to talk about the California Industrial Welfare Commission wage orders and certain documents and files that are connected to the California labor laws and the wage orders that can help you navigate the complicated California labor law. Okay, we'll get started. So a little bit about me. I have studied human resources and I have my MBA, but along with that, I have to tell you that I am not a lawyer and you need to seek legal counsel if you have any specific questions regarding California labor law. It changes a lot, and when you're watching this video, something could have changed that's relevant to what I'm talking about today. So you need to talk to your own attorney, and I am not an attorney. This is for information purposes only, but you need to talk to a lawyer because everybody's individual situations are different from each other. So it's very complicated, but seek an attorney. I am not an attorney. Okay, so we'll get started. Okay, so the Industrial Welfare Commission wage orders. There's 18 of these, and what happened was in 1913 in California, there was the Industrial Welfare Commission created wage orders, which specifies essentially the rules for employers regarding the rules that employees are going to work under in regards to wages and conditions of work and things like that. I'm going to pull up an example in just a sec. So it's not currently in operation. So it was formed in 1913, but I believe in 2004 it stopped functioning, or they disbanded the Industrial Welfare Commission, and it was picked up by the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, and they actually enforce the provisions, and they actually do some updates and edits. So these documents, the IWCs, are still active and relevant because you will be held to them depending upon what business you're in. Now, I did not provide a link. I will put links in the YouTube notes for the documents that I talk about today. I didn't want to provide links inside of a video because as soon as I do that, some links are going to go bad. So I can update them more easily if I put the links in the comments. So my recommendation is to search for Industrial Welfare Commission wage orders, and it will come up on the top of your search most likely. So the big question, there's 18 of them, and the big question is, which one do I use for my specific company? So there's another document that I want to talk about, and that is which IWC order. So when you Google this, you end up with a page that has 18 of these wage orders. And the big question is, which one should I use? So let me pull up what the wage order looks like. This is a wage order from, it's IWC 9. So before we talk about which one to use, let's take a look at what one of these looks like. This is IWC 9, which deals with transportation. You see it's 11 pages long. And it talks about regulating wages, hours, and working conditions in the transportation industry. And it is updated occasionally. They talk about revision 2018 right here. So it does get updated. So I highlighted some of the key parts to this. So it talks about who this is effective for, and first of all, it starts talking about executive exemptions and other exemptions, meaning people that are usually managerial or on salary. So these are people who are exempt from this wage order. Very important. If you have somebody who you believe is exempt, you need to make sure that they are exempt, and you need to be paying them properly. Typically in these wage orders, it's not always 100% on all of them, but most of them you have to pay people who are exempt in California 2 times the minimum wage. And I believe there are a couple industries where they have a specific amount, but it's typically 2 times the state minimum wage. So every time the minimum wage goes up, the minimum that a salary employee needs to be paid goes up as well. So that's something to think about. So we have the executive exemption, administrative exemption, professional exemption, and it goes on. There's some of these professional exemptions, I believe, have to do with computers and things like that. So definitions. There are definitions right up near the top, of course, that talk about the definitions of all of these terms that are going to be used. This is about transportation, Wage Order 9. So it talks about transportation industry and some different things like that. Okay. And then hours and days of work, general overtime, general provisions. Now, with some of the wage orders, the amount of hours that you work in a day before it goes into overtime is a little bit different. So you need to take a look at this depending upon which industry or occupation you have employees in. So it talks about daily overtime general provisions and then alternative work week schedules. If you have somebody working on an alternative work week, it's very important that you do this process correctly. You have to actually have a vote and you have to submit the results of the vote to Sacramento or the Department of Labor because they need to have it on file. And it's actually a complex procedure. This elections procedure. This has to do with the alternative work week. Still in here with alternative work week. Talking about alternative work week schedules. And these documents are complicated because of the way they organize them. So you have to really go over it with a kind of a fine-tooth comb of which subsection that you're in. So it talks about how you get into the alternative work week and then how you get out of it. So the employer has a lot of things to do. A little bit about child labor laws. It's very important in California. You don't violate child labor laws. And then minimum wages. Minimum wages in California, they have one set of minimum wages for employers that employ 26 or more employees, and then usually the implementation of the raises goes a little slower for employers that do 25 or less. So that's what this is about that's highlighted right here. Reporting time pay. This has to do with when you're called into work. And then license for disabled workers. Some industries allow you to actually pay workers a lower wage if they're disabled. And then how you will have records and things like that. Cash shortage breakage, uniforms, equipment, meals and lodging, meal periods, and rest periods, changing rooms and resting facilities, seats, temperature. This tells California mandates what temperature the working conditions have to be in with the changing rooms and the bathrooms, and elevators and exemptions. And then the separability, it's the deal with separability is it can say that there could be a part in here that isn't valid because of, say, law or a legal case. But what they're saying is it doesn't mean that the rest of the document is not valid. So it's interesting because you'll have parts of this that people get waivers for, but the rest of the document still holds true. And then posting of the order, it has to be posted in a place where employees can see it. So that's what a typical wage order looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to close this and go back to us talking about which one. Okay, so which IWC order? So they're categorized by industries and occupations. And most people would think this is an example. I just looked at Wage Order 9. So this is the correct wage order for an ambulance service. So it says most people would think that an ambulance service would be under Order 4, which is professional, technical, clerical, mechanical, or similar occupations. So EMTs, paramedics, you would think they would be under the professional classification. And also healthcare workers fit under Wage Order 4. But it's not. The ambulance transportation industry, because the ambulance business or service falls under the transportation industry, actually falls under wage order 9. So I've seen people that are confused on this, especially online, and they say, oh, it's wage order 4, and it's not, it's 9. So if you are in business, not, of course, just the transportation or healthcare, you need to figure out which wage order is the correct one. Otherwise, you will have problems and you can be fined for that. So what you do is you search for which IWC order, and I'll pull up the document that is actually titled which IWC order and show you how this works. Okay, this is which IWC order. Like I said, I'll put the current links in the notes for YouTube. Which IWC order classifications. So they make a document that's 47 pages long because it's hard to tell which wage order you should use. I'm kind of laughing because it is difficult. So there's a lot of disclaimers at the beginning of this document saying that, hey, if you're wrong, it's not their fault, essentially. It is your responsibility. But this is the best one here. Employers are advised that while courts may find this pamphlet to be useful in determining the classification of business and occupations under the Industrial Welfare Commission orders, courts are not required to follow the classifications of occupations listed herein, and that compliance with the guidelines suggested herein do not establish a safe harbor for classifying an employee within a particular wage order, which means you can't go to court and say that I went through this document and it said that I was in one wage order and I should have been following one wage order when the court ends up finding that you should have been following another one. So this document's saying, hey, this is a good thing to go by, but don't take this to court using it as a defense. Okay. So we have this index here that has all of the wage orders here. And I believe that there's one other one that is, miscellaneous employees. There's a minimum wage one as well, so I think there's actually 18 wage orders. Okay, so this is an important part that I want to talk about. In order to determine which Industrial Welfare Commission IWC order applies to an employer or business, it is first necessary to determine if a business is covered by an industry order. So industry order first before occupation. So that's why the ambulance service was in IWC 9 and it wasn't listed in the occupation of the employee. It was the ambulance, which was the industry. Okay. So you'll see that most of these are actually industries, okay? And then it says if it's not in an industry, then you're going to go with an occupational wage order, okay? And that's what this bottom section talks about. Separate multi. Okay, so this is the big deal with these things, is that this guide helps you understand what happens when you have let's say a Target or a certain business, but you have another company or you have people who clean the floors. So you might say, well, one might be merchandising or something like that. The other one is laundry or cleaning, janitorial, and they might be in different wage orders, say. Or you have a cafe inside of that business. They might be technically different wage orders. Well, it has to do with this. Distinct operations and multi-purpose businesses may be covered by different industry orders if they are operated for just different business purposes and management is separately organized at all levels. So let's say you have a business that has a little cafe inside. If that cafe is owned by, say, a large chain and the businesses are not connected, then the cafe will probably have their own wage order that won't be connected with the larger, say, business that it's operating within. So that's what this is talking about. They will be covered under different industry. So if it actually is... the other side of that is if we have a business that has some other aspects that go on that would technically, you might think they're under a different wage order, but they're still managed by the same management team and it's just a part of doing business within that industry, then they're probably going to be in that same industry's wage order and they're not going to be separate. So my advice would be to, this is what they call incidental housekeeping activities. And this talks about that if somebody is a housekeeper, but let's say it's going on within a private school, then it's going to be under the same, say, private school industry. Okay, so that's something to consider. That's why this document's here. Okay, so then it gets into crops. Amazingly, if some of these crops, or some of these vegetables, or take for instance almonds, or fruits or vegetables are on the tree, they may be in a different industrial welfare commission wage order than when they're being packed. So they're two different things. Very important that you take a look at this. So it says Order 14, Order 13, depending upon what the process is. If you're in, of course, agriculture, it's very important you take a look at this, okay? And then the last part is it actually explains all of the different industries or occupations that fall within the wage orders. So this is very useful for that, okay? So that's how this whole thing works. This is a very useful document. This is which IWC order, okay? Okay, so that's, you can go to which IWC order, and I will provide links in the comments. Okay. So Industrial Welfare Commission orders, that's the bread and butter of having employees and the basic rules of paying them correctly, okay? So the next thing is what happens when you have some weird questions and you're not sure what the answer would be. They may already be kind of litigated somewhere in history in California, and to find that, you can go to the DLSE Enforcement Policies and Interpretations Manual. So this is a document made up of case law that explains some of the past cases and kind of what the interpretations were within court. So this is very useful. Let me pull the document over. So this is the DLSE Enforcement Policies and Interpretations Manual. You just Google something like DLSE Enforcement Policies Interpretations, you're going to come up with this. This is very useful when you're looking for some weird thing and you're like, but that doesn't explain something that well in the IWC. So you look through here and they have all kinds of answers to things. They even have IWC definitions and they talk about alternative work weeks and the whole thing. This is a very useful document. I've looked at it when I'm unsure, especially in the ambulance business. They have different types of hours, okay? Meal periods and things like that. So that is the Enforcement Policies and Interpretations Manual available by the DLSE. Okay. So the next thing that we want to talk about is one last thing, and that is the Labor Commissioner Opinion Letters. These are really good too, because somebody went and had the same question as you, possibly. They mailed it into the Sacramento in California, and they asked this question of the DLSE, the labor commissioner, and they may have gotten a response. And when the letter was mailed in and they got a response, these letters will be posted. Okay, so I'm going to pull that up now. So this is the web page, and they're organized by DLSE opinion letters and DLSE opinion letters organized by subject and organized by date. I personally think that the subject is more useful because you can, similar letters are grouped. Very, very useful. Most of the time, if you have a question, you're going to find the answer to your question in this website with the opinion letters or in the interpretations manual. Okay. So, hopefully I answered some of your questions, maybe resolved some questions before you have them. And other than that, good luck. I recommend, there's a couple other things you can do. You can go to the California Department of Labor. There's some frequently asked questions section, and there's some good pages, the links about postings and things like that. But the start of everything with hiring employees and having them work for you is the IWCs, and then go from there. Thank you.